The breaking point. The Federation Council chamber stretched vast and cold, its crystalline walls reflecting the light of 1,000 distant stars. Today, those walls would witness the end of an era that had lasted 4 centuries. Ambassador Sarah Mitchell stood at the human delegation platform, her hands gripping the edges of the podium with controlled fury. At 58 years old, she had given 3 decades of her life to diplomatic service. She had negotiated treaties, prevented wars, and built bridges between species that had nothing in common except their need for human help. Now she would burn those bridges to ash. The council chamber held representatives from 217 species. The Voldrene occupied the highest tier, their crystalline bodies refracting light in patterns that showed their superiority complex. Below them sat the Korathi, massive bear-like beings whose military might had conquered half the galaxy before humans taught them the word diplomacy. The Sethri coiled in their heated pods, serpentine and ancient, watching everything with eyes that missed nothing and cared about less. In the center of it all sat Chancellor Voxen of the Voldrene, the Federation's supreme leader for the past 60 years. His crystalline face showed no emotion because it could show no emotion. That did not stop Sarah from seeing the dismissiveness in the way he barely acknowledged her presence. The human delegation may present their grievance, Voxen announced, his voice echoing through translation matrices in 100 languages. Though we remind the Council that this matter has already been decided through proper channels. Sarah did not smile. She did not bow. She simply began. 16 days ago, the Federation Council voted to cede the human colony world of New Sarajevo to the Thex Dominion as part of a territorial settlement. This decision was made without consulting Earth or any human authority. 3 million human colonists were given 72 hours to evacuate 400 years of settlement. A murmur ran through the chamber, but it was not one of sympathy. It was the sound of impatience. The evacuation was incomplete, Sarah continued, her voice steady despite the rage burning in her chest. When the Thex fleet arrived, 800,000 humans remained on the surface. They were farmers, teachers, doctors, children. They had nowhere to go. The Thex commander ordered orbital bombardment to clear the territory for their own colonization. The murmur stopped. Now there was only silence. 800,000 human beings were incinerated from orbit while this council debated trade tariffs on Korathi iron exports. When we demanded an emergency session, we were told to file the proper paperwork. When we filed the paperwork, we were told the matter was closed. When we demanded justice, we were told that sacrifices must be made for the greater good of the Federation. Sarah's hands were shaking now, but her voice remained clear. For 400 years, humanity has made those sacrifices. We joined the Federation as naive explorers hoping to find friends among the stars. We found employers instead. We found species who saw us as useful tools. We found a civilization that takes and takes and takes and never once asks what it costs us. Chancellor Voxen shifted in his elevated seat. Ambassador Mitchell, the new Sarajevo situation was unfortunate. The Council has already authorized a formal expression of regret. But we cannot allow personal tragedy to disrupt Federation business. The Thex agreement maintains peace in a volatile sector. Surely humanity understands that the needs of the many. Do not, Sarah interrupted, her voice cutting through the chamber like a blade, quote human philosophy to justify human genocide. The silence that followed was absolute. Sarah looked around the chamber slowly, meeting the eyes of every species that would look at her. Most looked away. Let me tell you what 400 years of Federation membership has cost humanity. We have fought in 93 wars that were not ours. Human soldiers have died on battlefields we cannot pronounce for causes we did not choose. We were told it was our duty to the Federation. We believed you. She pulled up a holographic display. Names began scrolling across the air, thousands of them, then hundreds of thousands. These are the humans who died closing the breach of Xander when the Voldrene defensive line collapsed. 12 million human marines held that breach for 18 days while Voldrene fleets retreated to safety. When the breach finally closed, fewer than 3,000 humans survived. The Valdrine awarded them medals. The medals came with no survivor benefits and no compensation for the families of the dead. The display changed. More names appeared. These are the human engineers who rebuilt Korathi industrial infrastructure after the plague of moths consumed their manufacturing worlds. 80,000 human experts worked for 20 years in toxic environments without proper safety equipment because the Korathi said proper equipment was too expensive. 63,000 of those engineers died of exposure-related illnesses. The Korathi economy recovered completely. The engineers were never mentioned in any history of the recovery. The names kept coming. These are the human doctors who stopped the Red Death on Sethri Prime. They developed a cure in 8 months while the disease killed millions. The cure required human DNA as a base component. 6,000 human volunteers donated so much of their own biological material that their immune systems collapsed. They all died. The Sethri named a hospital wing after them. That wing was demolished 15 years ago to make room for a parking structure. Sarah deactivated the display. The names vanished, but their weight remained. 93 wars. 247 humanitarian crises. 512 infrastructure rebuilding projects. 1,739 diplomatic missions to prevent conflicts that would have killed billions. In 4 centuries of Federation membership, humanity has lost 427 million citizens in service to species that will not learn our names. She placed both hands flat on the podium. And now you have added 800,000 more to that list. 800,000 humans burned alive because you needed to make a deal with the Thex. You did not ask us. You did not warn us. You simply decided that human lives were an acceptable price for your political convenience. Chancellor Voxen leaned forward. Ambassador, your emotion is understandable but misplaced. The Federation operates on principles of collective benefit. Individual member species cannot. Cannot what? Sarah's voice rose for the first time. Cannot expect to be treated as equals. Cannot expect to be consulted before our people are sentenced to death. Cannot expect the most basic respect after 4 centuries of bleeding for you. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a data crystal, holding it up for the entire chamber to see. This crystal contains humanity's formal withdrawal from every Federation treaty, agreement, alliance, defense pact, mutual aid program, and trade arrangement. Earth's government authorized this action unanimously. Every human colony world has ratified the decision. As of this moment, humanity is no longer a member of the Galactic Federation. The chamber exploded. 217 species began shouting in 217 languages. The translation matrices overloaded and shut down. The sound was deafening. Sarah stood perfectly still in the center of the chaos, watching them panic. When the translation systems finally rebooted and order was restored, Chancellor Voxen's crystalline face had shifted to a darker shade. In Valdrine physiology, that meant anger. You cannot do this. Federation membership is binding. Earth has obligations. Earth has fulfilled every obligation, Sarah replied calmly. Our legal experts have spent 6 months reviewing every treaty. Every single agreement includes a withdrawal clause. We are exercising all of those clauses simultaneously, effective immediately. A Korathi general stood up, his massive form intimidating even at a distance. This is madness. Who will maintain the border defenses? Who will respond to the breach if it reopens? Who will? You will, Sarah said. Or you will not. That is no longer humanity's concern. The Sethri ambassador raised one clawed appendage. Be reasonable, Ambassador Mitchell. Clearly Earth has grievances. Let us discuss compensation. More council seats, perhaps. Better trade terms. Name your price. Sarah laughed. It was a bitter sound that carried no joy. That is exactly the problem, Ambassador. You think everything has a price. You think we can be bought. You think if you offer us enough scraps from your table, we will forget that you fed our children into your wars and called it alliance. She shook her head slowly. We do not want your council seats. We do not want your trade terms. We do not want anything from you except to be left alone. We are going home. All of us. Every human in Federation space is being recalled. Every mission is being terminated. Every obligation is being dissolved. The Valdrine Chancellor stood now, his crystalline body towering over the chamber. If you do this, humanity will be alone. No protection, no trade, no access to Federation technology or resources. You will be isolated, vulnerable, forgotten. Sarah met his gaze without flinching. We will be free. She placed the data crystal on the podium and walked away. The doors of the council chamber opened before her. Behind her, the Federation descended into chaos, but she did not look back. In orbit above the Federation capital world, the first human ships were already turning toward home. They were transport vessels, cargo haulers, diplomatic yachts, and military escorts. Every ship flying a human flag began the long journey back to Earth. On 3,000 Federation worlds, human advisors packed their belongings. Human engineers shut down the systems only they knew how to operate. Human doctors closed their clinics and sealed their research. Human soldiers boarded transports and left defensive positions they had held for decades. The Federation did not believe it would happen. Within 72 hours, 12 million humans had evacuated Federation space. Within 2 weeks, the number reached 100 million. Within a month, every human in the galaxy was either home or on their way. The Federation sent messages demanding explanations. The messages went unanswered. The Federation sent ambassadors offering negotiations. The ambassadors were turned away at the border. The Federation sent threats of economic sanctions and military action. The threats were met with silence. And in that silence, something fundamental changed in the galaxy. For 400 years, the Federation had operated on a simple assumption: humanity would always help. Humans were emotional, idealistic, incapable of walking away from those in need. It was their nature. It was their weakness. But the Federation had never asked what would happen if they pushed too far. They had never considered that every species, even humans, had a breaking point. Now they knew. On Earth, in the United Assembly Chamber, Sarah Mitchell stood before her own people and delivered her final report. She was tired beyond words, but there was peace in her eyes that had not been there for 3 decades. We are home, she said simply. And we are never leaving again. The Assembly voted unanimously to seal the borders. No Federation ship would be permitted to enter human space. No Federation communication would be answered. No Federation request for aid would be acknowledged. Humanity built a wall between itself and the galaxy. And for the first time in 4 centuries, humans began to heal. The galaxy would have to learn to survive without them. Or it would not. Either way, it was no longer humanity's problem. The Reckoning. 3 years had passed since humanity walked away from the Galactic Federation. 3 years since Ambassador Sarah Mitchell placed that data crystal on the council podium and ended 4 centuries of service. 3 years since the galaxy learned that even the most patient species could run out of patience. The Federation had not believed the silence would last. They had expected humans to return within months, perhaps a year at most. Humans were helpers by nature, fixers of problems, incapable of ignoring suffering even when it was not their own. The Federation had counted on that weakness. They had been wrong. The breach of Xander reopened 14 months after humanity departed. The dimensional tear that connected normal space to the nightmare realm beyond had been humanity's nightmare for 2 generations. Human marines had died by the millions keeping it sealed. Human scientists had spent decades developing the containment technology that kept reality stable in that sector. When the breach reopened, the Valdrine defensive fleet responded exactly as their doctrine required. They established a perimeter, activated the containment systems, and prepared to hold the line until reinforcements arrived. The containment systems did not activate. The Valdrine engineers had never learned how they actually worked. For 40 years, they had simply pressed the buttons that human technicians told them to press. Now there were no human technicians, and the buttons did nothing. The nightmare realm poured through the breach. Entities that violated physics consumed 7 Valdrine battle stations in the first hour. The defensive fleet broke and ran after losing 30% of their ships. The breach remained open for 8 weeks. 43 star systems were evacuated. 14 billion sentients became refugees. The economic damage was incalculable. The Valdrine sent 723 urgent messages to Earth, each one more desperate than the last. They offered technology, resources, territorial concessions. They promised reforms, apologized for past mistakes, begged for assistance. Earth's response was silence. The breach eventually collapsed on its own, as it sometimes did. But the damage was done. The Valdrine had revealed their weakness to the entire galaxy, and the predators noticed. General Cromath of the Korathi stood in the ruins of what had been the Federation's largest military installation. The base had been built by Korathi labor and Korathi materials, but it had been designed by human engineers and operated by human technicians. The Korathi had supplied the muscle. Humans had supplied the brains. Now the base was dead. Power systems failed constantly. Life support was unreliable. The weapons platforms that should have provided orbital defense had not fired in 6 months. Cromath had engineers working around the clock to repair them, but the engineers could not understand the systems well enough to fix them. "It is too complicated," his chief engineer reported, his massive paws gesturing at holographic schematics that made no sense. The humans built redundancies within redundancies. Every system connects to 6 others in ways we cannot map. When we repair one thing, 3 others fail. It is like the entire base is alive and fighting against us. Cromath stared at the schematics. He had fought in 40 campaigns and conquered 16 worlds. He understood war and violence and the application of overwhelming force. But he had never understood this, the quiet genius of systems so elegant they seemed simple until you tried to replicate them. "Contact Earth," he ordered. "Sir, we have sent 214 messages. They do not respond." "Send another. Tell them we will meet any price. Tell them we acknowledge our failures. Tell them." Cromatha's voice trailed off. What could he tell them? That he was sorry? That the Korathi had taken human expertise for granted? That they had assumed human knowledge would always be available? "Tell them we need them," he finished quietly. The message was sent. Like all the others, it received no reply. On the other side of the galaxy, the Sethri Empire faced a different crisis. The Red Death had returned. The plague that human doctors had cured 50 years ago had mutated and come back stronger. It swept through Sethri worlds like fire, killing millions before the Empire even understood what was happening. The Sethri had kept extensive records of the cure that humans had developed. They had the formulas, the procedures, the complete documentation. What they did not have was the intuitive understanding that human doctors possessed. The cure required constant adjustment based on symptoms that were difficult to quantify. Human doctors had developed an instinct for those adjustments through experience and shared insight. The Sethri tried to replicate the cure exactly as documented. It failed. The plague had mutated in ways the original cure could not address. They needed someone who understood the underlying principles well enough to adapt the treatment. They needed humans. Ambassador Sethrak personally recorded a message to Earth. His scales had dulled with age and stress. His eyes, usually so calculating and cold, showed something the Sethri rarely displayed: fear. "We were wrong," he said to the camera. "We took your sacrifices and never acknowledged what they cost. We accepted your help as our right rather than your gift. We watched your volunteers die to save our people and we built a parking structure on their memorial. We are facing extinction now, and we know we do not deserve your help. But I am asking anyway. Not for the Empire. For the children who are dying. Please. The message was sent through every available channel. It was broadcast on frequencies reserved for emergencies. It was delivered by courier ships that waited at the border of human space for permission to enter. Earth's response was silence. The plague burned through 16 Sethri worlds before it finally burned itself out. 2 billion Sethri died. The Empire never recovered its former influence. The Federation itself fractured. Without human diplomats to mediate disputes, old conflicts reignited. Species that had coexisted peacefully for centuries discovered that their peace had been maintained by humans who worked tirelessly behind the scenes to prevent misunderstandings from becoming wars. The Thex Dominion, emboldened by their acquisition of New Sarajevo, began expanding aggressively. They had always been contained by human-led defensive alliances. Now those alliances crumbled. 37 worlds fell to Thex conquest in 2 years. The Federation tried to respond, but coordination required systems that humans had built and maintained. Communication networks failed. Supply chains collapsed. Battle plans that looked perfect on paper fell apart in execution because no one understood the complex logistics that humans had always handled. Chancellor Voxen watched his Federation die from his crystalline tower on the capital world. He had ruled for 60 years. He had presided over an era of unprecedented prosperity and expansion. And he had done it all while taking humanity's contributions for granted. Now the bills were coming due. How many messages have we sent to Earth? He asked his aide. 3,147, Chancellor. And their responses? None. Voxen touched the data crystal that Ambassador Mitchell had left behind 3 years ago. He had kept it as a reminder of his authority, proof that no species could simply walk away from the Federation. Now it felt like a tombstone marking the death of everything he had built. Not everyone had treated humanity with contempt. On a small ocean world called Choth, an aquatic species remembered differently. The Kyanthi were philosophers and artists, gentle beings who contributed poetry and music to galactic culture but little else. 60 years ago, a disease had nearly destroyed them. The Federation had voted not to help. The Kyanthi were too small, too insignificant, too poor to warrant intervention. The humans came anyway. Human doctors worked for 4 years to develop a cure. Human engineers built water purification systems to prevent reinfection. Human teachers helped Kyanthi children recover from trauma. No one asked the humans to help. No one paid them. They came because they believed that every species deserved to survive, regardless of their strategic importance or economic value. The Kyanthi never forgot. Elder Methera floated in her meditation pool and considered what her people could do. They were not warriors. They could not fight the Federation's collapse. They were not engineers. They could not repair the systems that were failing across the galaxy. But they were honest. And perhaps honesty was what the situation required. She composed a message, choosing each word carefully. It was not a request for help. It was not an apology on behalf of species that had wronged humanity. It was simply the truth. My name is Methera of Choth. I am speaking to you as an individual, not as a representative of any government or organization. 60 years ago, your people saved mine when no one else would. You asked for nothing. We had nothing to give. You saved us because you believed we deserved to be saved. She paused, gathering her thoughts. The galaxy is falling apart now. Species that took your help for granted are facing the consequences of their arrogance. I am not asking you to save them. I am not asking you to return. I am simply saying thank you for what you did for us. And I am sorry for not saying it loudly enough when you were still here to hear it. She sent the message to Earth and expected nothing in return. 3 days later, she received a response. Elder Methera, this is Dr. James Chen. I was part of the medical team that worked on Choth 60 years ago. I have lived in my garden for the past 3 years and thought I would never practice medicine again. Your message reminded me why I became a doctor. Not for gratitude, but because healing matters. I cannot speak for Earth, but I can speak for myself. If your people ever need medical assistance again, call me. I will come. Methera read the message 17 times. Then she composed another message, this one to a different recipient. Within a month, 300 Kyanthi artists and philosophers began traveling to human space. They were not diplomats. They were not begging for help. They were simply visiting to learn, to understand, to build genuine friendship with the species that had saved them. Humanity, cautiously, allowed them to enter. On Earth, Sarah Mitchell walked through her garden. She had retired from politics after returning home. She grew tomatoes now, and peppers, and herbs that reminded her of a life before the Federation. She received daily reports on the galaxy's collapse. She read them without emotion. Part of her felt vindicated. Part of her felt sad. Mostly, she felt tired. A young woman approached her garden gate. She wore the uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps, though the corps had no one left to negotiate with. Ambassador Mitchell. I am Lieutenant Sarah Parker. I was named after you. Sarah looked up from her tomato plants. That seems like a burden to carry. It is an honor, Parker replied. I came to ask your advice. The Kyanthi have been visiting Earth for 3 months now. They are genuine. They truly want to learn from us, to build friendship without agenda. Some in the government believe we should respond in kind. Others say we should maintain complete isolation. What would you do? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. She looked at the tomato in her hand, red and perfect and grown without any help from the galaxy that had broken her heart. The Federation hurt us, she said finally. They used us and dismissed us and killed our people. Walking away was necessary. It was right. But staying away forever? That would mean letting their cruelty change who we are. She looked at Parker. The Kyanthi were always kind. They never took advantage. If they are reaching out in genuine friendship, perhaps we should respond. Not as the helpers who fix everyone's problems. Not as the tools who say yes to every request. But as equals who choose their friends carefully. Parker nodded slowly. A new beginning. A careful beginning, Sarah corrected. We will never go back to what we were. But perhaps we can move forward to something better. 6 months later, Earth signed its first post-Federation treaty. It was with Choth, and it was simple, mutual respect, equal exchange, honest friendship. No one would save anyone. Both species would simply exist together as partners who valued each other. Other species watched carefully. A few, those who had genuinely regretted their treatment of humanity, began to approach Earth with similar offers. Most were rejected. Some were accepted. Humanity did not return to the galaxy. Instead, they built something new. Something small and careful and based on principles that the Federation had never understood. The Federation continued to crumble. Chancellor Voxen was overthrown by his own people. The great powers fractured into smaller nations. The galaxy entered an age of chaos. But in that chaos, seeds of something better began to grow. Species that had relied on human strength learned to be strong. Species that had depended on human wisdom learned to be wise. Species that had taken human friendship for granted learned what friendship actually meant. It would take generations. Many would not survive the transition. But those who did would build a galaxy that was more honest, more equal, more genuine than the Federation had ever been. And humanity, from behind their carefully maintained borders, watched and waited. They had walked away from the galaxy. But they had not abandoned hope that the galaxy might someday deserve to walk with them again.